You are listening to the second part of the story. You can listen to the first part in the previous video or by following the link in the description under this video. Happy listening. The next day, Peg came to a decision. Robert had recovered enough to give her some clear answers. So after having breakfast at a restaurant across the street from the hospital, once again eluding Charlie, he and Lisa went there, ready for a serious conversation with Robert. When they entered the hall, Lisa asked, "Mom, why are you avoiding Uncle Charlie? There's something wrong here. He showed up after I asked him not to come. He insisted that I devote myself to him, leaving Robert. And what Robert said makes me think that he has reason to believe that Charlie and I had something to do with his accident. I know I have nothing to do with it, so that leaves Charlie. Your father is a smart man. He might not have been at his best since that bicycle accident, but he was no fool, and he must have had some reason to believe that Charlie and I were together and wished him harm." They rode in silence in the elevator to Robert's floor. At the nurse's station, they were told that he had had a restful night. The second night, he had slept until he had woken up from his coma. "I think it happened because his friend Mary was next to him all night. She calms him down," the nurse said. When they arrived in the room, the nurse was taking readings, and Mary was sleeping peacefully in a chair next to the bed. They quietly entered the room, and while Peg took the remaining side chair, Lisa wandered along the corridor in search of an empty chair that she could fetch. As soon as the nurse finished her business, Peg said quietly, "Robert, Lisa and I have come. Good morning, dear. How are you feeling?" "Well, my whole body hurts, but not as much as yesterday, so I guess it's healing," he replied. "No matter how many painkillers they give me, I can't get rid of the headache. I've been having headaches ever since I had a bike accident, but this is something new and more serious. Anyway, good morning, Lisa. Peg, I always know when you enter the room because I smell your perfume and that Peg scent that I have loved for so long. Where's Charlie?" "I don't know where he is, probably at the hotel." In the dark of the night, when sleep did not come, Peg decided that she would not lie anymore. She decided that she would be truthful with Robert, no matter what, even if it hurt, although she would try to say everything as softly as possible. "Robert, knowing how upset my presence makes you and how strongly you react to the mention of Charlie, I asked your best friend to stay away for a while until I understand why you react this way and why you think that Charlie and I are plotting against you. He arrived anyway and is waiting for me at the hotel so that I can tell him that his visit will be welcome. If this is so, then he will wait until hell freezes over and people walk on Jupiter," answered Robert. "You always call him my best friend. Best friends don't try to seduce their friend's wife. Best friends don't conspire to get their friend out of the way." Hearing this, Peg was horrified. At that moment, Mary stirred in her chair. Peg knew that those reclining hospital chairs might look comfortable, but they weren't. "Good morning, Mary," Peg said cheerfully. "I bet your back hurts after sleeping in that awful chair." "Not so bad, actually," Mary answered sleepily. "Much better than sleeping on the ground. And I wasn't drenched in rain," she said, looking out the window at the spring downpour. "I know you need to go to the bathroom after a long night," Peg said, pulling out her purse. "Why don't you and Lisa walk along the corridor, and then, when you've done your business, Lisa will go with you to the cafeteria for breakfast." She handed Lisa a wad of cash and quietly addressed her daughter. "Make sure she takes her medicine and drinks water. We all need it to be in balance." When they were gone, Peg turned back to her bandaged husband. "Robert, it's time for us to clarify the situation. I need to know why you think I wish you harm and why you're so angry at your best friend. I know you realized he was harassing me even before your accident, but I stood up to him. If you had seen how worried he was after the accident, how we drove through all the streets of the city looking for you after you left the hospital, I was delirious, and he was my anchor. We searched and searched day after day, evening after evening. He, like me, was determined to find you and bring you home. Peggy, I've thought a lot about you over the years, mostly good, sometimes not so flattering, but I've never thought you were naive. Charlie is a good companion. He's a lot of fun to be around and can help with projects around the house. Always ensures that our vehicles undergo maintenance in a timely manner. But Charlie Ford is a car salesman. He knows how to present himself well, make a positive and powerful presentation, and not mention the negative sides of any situation. Charlie always has an ace or trump card up his sleeve. You can have fun with him. He's not someone you can trust with your life. Especially, Robert became very animated, especially when money is at stake. And he's smart enough to figure out that you have family money. We never talked about it, but he knows. Okay, Peg replied. I know that he enjoys the benefits that our friendship has brought him. But knowing this and admitting it, why does it make you think that he has a grudge against you? And, more importantly, why do you think that I could be against you? Since we've been together, I've never done anything other than love you. Even when you disappeared and I didn't know why or if I'd ever see you again, I loved you. Honestly, the fact that you suggest that I might wish you harm is very offensive, but I love you so much that I am ready to ignore the insult, if only you are ready to tell me where it comes from. Lisa and Mary returned to the ward. They heard Peg's words. Tell her, Bobby. Tell me what you told me, Mary said quietly. I think she deserves to know. Please, Dad. I want to know too, Lisa interjected. What made you disappear from my life just when Laura and I needed you as teenagers? Why did you leave us? Robert took a deep breath. Even though his eyes were closed, the women could see the color begin to rise up his cheeks. Okay, I'll tell you. And then you can try to convince me that I'm wrong. After Charlie began to spend more time around us, visiting our house and joining us at parties, I noticed that there was more and more sympathy between him and you. I saw the chemistry between you. It began to seem to me that instead of him being the third wheel in our relationship, I became him, and it hurts. I still believed that you would be a faithful wife to me, but I didn't believe Charlie. And the day I wanted us to go for a ride, and Charlie said he didn't want to, and you agreed with him, and you two decided to stay and let me ride alone, I was upset. It seemed to me that you had some kind of agreement that you wanted to be alone. But it was just a feeling, and I had no proof, and you always loved me. So I took my helmet, went outside, and got on my bike for a ride. I hoped that you would change your mind and follow me, but you didn't go. The door closed behind me, and everything that happened on the other side happened without me. I was only a couple of miles out of town when a blue pickup truck turned into the bike path, and the rearview mirror hit me in the back of the head and knocked me off my feet. As I fell, I looked and recognized Pedro's pickup truck and Pedro himself at the wheel. Then apparently he hit his head on a tree and lost consciousness. Pedro? Which Pedro? Who is Pedro? Asked Peg with bewilderment. You know Pedro, this is Charlie the loader at the dealership, his auxiliary worker and errand boy. You mean Pete? I always called him Pete, Peg said. So you thought that since you recognized Pete or Pedro driving the pickup truck, I was the one who dealt with you? This is too much. Yes, said Robert. And a few days after I returned to the world from a coma and began to undergo rehabilitation, Pedro came to my hospital room. He apologized for hurting me. Said he just had to knock me into a ditch and mash me a little so Charlie could get you into bed. But I forgot how far that big rear-view mirror stuck out, and when I saw how it hit me, I headed towards the hills. Charlie was very angry with him. He is a good enough friend not to want to hurt me, but not so good that he does not seduce my wife. Pedro said that while I was riding my bike, Charlie was already dragging you up the stairs to have sex in our bed. It was then that I realized that you were lost to me. After that, he left. Perhaps after this, you felt some distance from me for the first time. But I tried to brush it off and convinced myself that Charlie and Pedro were just fooling me so he could get you. Robert, you have to believe me when I tell you that Charlie tried and failed to get me into bed that day, Peg said quietly. She couldn't tell him how close he was to it. Well, maybe not. But a few days later, just as I was about to be discharged home, Pedro returned. He said that after you and Charlie tasted the forbidden fruit, you decided you needed to be together, and I needed to be out of the way. Pedro said that he had a car parked outside and a bag packed for me, and that we should get out of here as soon as possible. "I hate to hurt you, Senor Stevens," he said, "and I don't want Charlie and your wife to hurt you anymore. Come with me, I will take you to safety." Due to the concussion, I was too confused to resist, so I went with him. We walked out the back door of the hospital, got into his car, and he drove me for 2 days until we got here, and then he stopped the car at a homeless camp and stopped. He gave me a debit card and a piece of paper with a PIN code and said that there would always be money in the account. He wished me luck, then pushed my suitcase out of the car and drove off. That was the last I heard from anyone from my old life. I think Mary has already told you about what my life has been like since I've been here. Peg and Lisa sat with tears in their eyes. "What a bastard," Peg growled. "I slept with that worthless son of a bitch for 7 years. God, what a fool I was." Lisa gently touched her hand. Robert turned his head away, and his mouth bared. Mary stared at her with a shocked look. Suddenly she realized what she had said. "Oh God, Robert, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You were gone, I was lonely, and he was persistent. I resisted as best I could, but in the end, I gave up. And then the guy I innocently called Uncle Charlie. The guy who filled the void when you were gone. The guy who took Laura and me to soccer games and was Laura's dad at daddy-daughter dances, moved into our house and started leading myself as a husband and father," Lisa said through tears. "Dad, you have to believe that we didn't know anything. Mom loves you so much. She was so worried when you suffered. And then when you disappeared, she would never betray you the way you imagined all these years. We were all fooled. We thought that Charlie was our friend and was helping us through the crisis. And we had no idea." Peg turned to Mary. "Thank you for trying to fill the void in Robert's life and being his friend and confidant," she said. "I feel a little better that he had such a close friend who helped him survive this nightmare." "Believe me," Mary replied, "Bobby helped me and the others more than any of us could have helped him." At this point, it became obvious that Robert was overcome by fatigue and needed to rest. His good hand rested on his forehead, as if he was trying to squeeze out a headache. Mary and Lisa invited Mary back to the hotel for lunch, and this time she accepted. She was dressed in the new clothes that Peg had bought for her, and after she and Lisa spent a few minutes in the ladies' room with the mirror and makeup, she felt quite presentable. Upon entering the hotel, they were shocked to see Charlie, Pedro, and a Latina they didn't know sitting in the lobby bar enjoying drinks together. Charlie and the woman looked very familiar to them. Pedro seemed to be enjoying a taste of the high life. Lisa headed towards their table. "Let me go kick this worthless son of a bitch balls," she said through clenched teeth. "No, wait," Mary said, grabbing her hand. "They don't know me. You guys go back out and go through the back door. I'll take a table next to them and try to hear what they're talking about." Peg gave her the room number and told her to order a drink in the room and then come back when she had something to say. "Take my phone and see if you can record them." She showed Mary how to start recording and how to point the camera. Mary spent the last few years among desperate people. Some were in desperate need of food, some were in desperate need of oblivion, some were in desperate need of human communication. Many were simply desperate to be left alone. She was not prepared for the conversation she overheard at the next table. "I've put up with this crap long enough," Charlie said. "I was Bob's best friend. I comforted Peg. I was a surrogate daddy for these entitled bitchy ladies. I'm ready to pay and earn." "So what do you want?" asked Pedro. "I want Bob to have an unexplained medical failure and die. Then I want to marry a grief-stricken widow who has a terrible accident, ready to share the booty with the girls. I like them, and if I play it right, I might even be able to seduce the younger one." "Nice. Very nice. And I'll stay on the beans," the woman said. "When you get a wife and daughter, do you think you'll have enough left for me?" "Don't worry, baby. I always have enough for you. And Pedro will also get a good reward if he doesn't screw up this time." Lord, there should have been a simple turn and flight. A cheating wife, a divorce from her husband, and then grandma. But instead, endless nonsense. "Sorry, boss, but these are good people. I don't like this." Pedro became nervous. "You don't have to like it." If you want to share the spoils, you have to do the work. Mary heard all she could bear. As she stood up to leave, she bumped into the conspirators' table, spilling their drinks. She took good aim, and Charlie's glass fell into his lap. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, bumping into a chair. "We need to get Bobby out of the hospital to safety," Mary exclaimed, running into Peg's room. "They're going to kill him." "Wait, what are you saying?" Charlie was his best friend. Why would he kill him? Peg was shocked. Even though Robert had told them, she still couldn't understand that Charlie was a bad guy. Mary handed her the phone. "Play the recording," was all she said. "Maria, why don't you come to my room and help me get rid of these wet clothes?" Charlie said, standing up after a drink was spilled on him. "And you, Pete, go to the hospital and see how we can help Robert get out for good." Peg's blood ran cold as she watched the video on her phone. Lisa cried quietly. They were shocked to realize how thoroughly they had been duped. Lisa spoke first. "I will kill him. Does he want to kill Dad and sleep with my little sister? It will not happen. I let that bastard into my bed. I never thought, God, what a fool I was. And all this time, Robert slept on the ground because he thought I was in love with this monster. Sorry, girls, there is no time to worry now." Mary realized that she needed to take the initiative into her own hands. Communication with people from the real world gave her strength and sharpened her ingenuity. "We can kill later. Now we need to protect Bobby." Peg and Lisa looked at her in surprise. Mary grinned back at them. "Hey, I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid." She looked at the phone. "Is it possible to somehow print a picture from it?" "It would be possible if I were at home with our printer," Peg said. "Let's take him to hospital security. Maybe they can do something about it," Lisa suggested, pulling herself together. The women grabbed their purses and headed for the door. At the hospital, Peg and Lisa went to look for security. Mary went to Robert's room, hiding a knife under her clothes. When she arrived, he was already asleep, so she moved a chair closer to the door to block the path of anyone who didn't belong there, and took over as guard. At the security office, Lisa explained who they were and asked them to protect her father. She showed the security chief the video recording that corroborated her story and asked if copies could be made from the phone to show the suspects' faces. Together with the IT specialist, they transmitted a screenshot which clearly showed all three faces to the hospital network and displayed a message on monitors on all floors. "Stay alert." By the time the women reached the hospital, Pedro had finished his rehearsal. He measured the distance from the infirmary to Robert's room, noting surveillance cameras and blind spots. I resisted the urge to chat with a particularly attractive nurse because I didn't want to draw attention to myself. He thought that if he could get hold of a janitor's or orderly's outfit, then with his Latino appearance he could become invisible. Entering the room, he saw that Charlie was having fun with a woman. She leaned over the edge of the bed, naked and out of breath. As always, he was invited to join. While they were having sex, Pedro told Charlie what he learned at the hospital. "If we go to a uniform rental place and buy me a janitor's outfit and Maria a nurse's outfit, then one of us can get close enough to inject something into an IV or turn something off." "Okay, first thing tomorrow we'll find a uniform store." Meanwhile, Peg and Lisa rose and joined Mary in Robert's room. While they were reporting their progress to security, Robert stirred and moved as much as he could. "What's happening?" he asked. "Meeting? Darling, as soon as we can remove the blindfolds from your eyes, we need to get you out of here. You are in danger." "I understood this as soon as I heard your voice," he answered bitterly. "Bobby, honey, you got it all wrong." "It's Charlie. He's the one behind all this," Mary told him, taking his free hand. "Peg, Lisa and I will protect you and make sure nothing happens to you. But we need to get you to a safe place where they can't find you." "I'm in no condition to leave here," he commented dryly. "I have an idea," Lisa intervened. "I thought we could take him to a hotel," she told Peg and Mary. "Better yet, let the hospital transfer him to a rehabilitation center. We will keep the location confidential so he can receive the physical therapy and treatment he needs to recover. Dad, when does your doctor usually come to check on you?" God knows, I haven't seen a watch since I came here, he joked. Usually after breakfast, and then, I guess, after lunch, before he goes home. Was he already here this afternoon? Asked Peg. No, unless it's during sleep. I'll go to the nurse's station and tell them we need to talk to the doctor as soon as possible, Peg said, walking out into the hallway. As luck would have it, Robert's doctor arrived just as she arrived. She asked if he had seen the security message, and he replied that he had. They're after Robert, she told him. Can we transfer him to a rehabilitation center where they can't find him? Yes, but it will take some time to prepare everything. Can we transfer him to another ward in the hospital, where they won't look for him? I'll check now. An hour later, a small army of medical and transport personnel moved Robert to a private room in the hospital's maternity ward. Security was provided by a retired policeman dressed in riot gear, and Mary, who again took up post right in the ward. For some reason, no one has yet discovered or confiscated her knife. Everyone who came to his former ward or called on the phone was informed that he had been discharged. The next morning, Pedro and Maria, wearing borrowed uniforms, went up separately to Robert's former room. Pedro passed by, working in the hallway with a broom, then went back down the stairs. Nurse! Maria looked into the nursing station. One of the real nurses was about to tell her where he had been transferred when she noticed she wasn't wearing a badge. I don't know you. Where is your badge? She asked. Maria began to tell her the story of losing her badge when the nurse saw a security message and photo appear on the computer monitor. Wait here, I need to check something, she said, and went to the other end of the room. When Maria saw her reaching for the phone, she panicked and quickly walked towards the elevators. The nurse quickly dialed security and warned them to follow her as she exited the elevator. Stepping out of the elevator into the lobby, Maria fell into the arms of a security guard and was hurriedly taken to the waiting area where she was to wait for the police. Coming out onto the landing, Pedro saw her being taken away. He slipped out the door and headed to his rental car, then called Charlie. He's gone, boss, and security has grabbed Maria. What do you mean he's not there? Where did he go? Then, crap, they will discover that Maria is here illegally and send her back to Mexico. You better get out of there before they spot you, Charlie said. Go back to the hotel and we'll try to sort this out. Pedro entered Charlie's room and saw him sitting at the table with a laptop. They must have noticed Maria because she didn't have a badge, Charlie said as Pedro looked over his shoulder. I took a screenshot from the hospital website and got the logo. I'll make myself a badge. It won't be perfect, but it should do the job if no one bothers to look closely. It's much worse, boss. They have our faces on all the computer monitors throughout the hospital. Damn it. How did they do it? Don't know. I only caught a glimpse of it when I passed the first aid station on the way. It looks like this was done while we were sitting in the hotel lobby. That means Peg knows something. We're done. When I go after Robert, I will have to wear a surgical mask, like a doctor. Why look for him now? And how will you find him? He must die. Maybe I can convince Peg that I didn't do anything, and the plan can still go ahead. Anyway, I'm tired of supporting my old buddy Bob. He must meet a tragic end. Maybe we'll even sue the hospital for a ton of money. All that remains is to find him. Let's hide here and keep an eye on Peg. Someday she will have to return here. Then I'll let her lead me to him. The next morning, Charlie followed Peg as she drove away from the hotel. Instead of driving to the hospital, she drove 10 miles in the opposite direction and parked in front of a rehabilitation center connected to the main hospital. She walked slowly to the front door to ensure that if she was being followed, she would be seen entering. Briskly, she walked through the lobby and down the hallway that led to the exit at the back of the building. As she walked out the door, she looked back and saw Charlie just approaching the exit. Satisfied that he did not notice her departure, she closed the door and got into the small sedan Lisa had rented that morning. Charlie stood at the front desk, trying in vain to find out Robert's room number as they drove away, this time heading straight to the hospital. Lisa dropped Peg off at the door of the maternity hospital, and she went to the airport to meet her sister. Laura managed to negotiate with the college so she could leave early. She will take the last 2 exams online. Entering the room, Peg saw that Robert had already woken up, and Mary was still at her post at the door. "Have you been up all night?" she asked Mary worriedly. "Yes. I think I dozed off a couple of times, but not for long." Peg handed her the money. "Go have breakfast. I'll keep watch for now." Mary hesitated, but hunger and fatigue took over, and she got up to go. "Here, you better take this," she said, handing Peg the knife. "It's not too big, but it's sharp." Mary pointed to a plainclothes security officer standing in the corridor and headed towards coffee and food. Peg greeted Robert and told him about the amazing events of the last 24 hours. "You were so right about Charlie," she finished. "I'm ashamed that I allowed him to deceive me for so long." Robert just nodded. "Tell me about the debit card, Robert. How does it work? Are you saying that you don't know? I always assumed that you were behind this, paying me an allowance so that I would stay away and not interfere with you two." "Oh, God, Robert, it kills me that you could think that. No, as far as I knew, one day you disappeared into the fog, and I never knew where or why. And when will you return, or whether you will return at all? So tell me about the map." "That day, when Pedro dropped me off on the side of the road, he handed me the card and PIN and said that there would always be money there. When I went to use the card, I discovered that there was $1,000 on it. I spent my money sparingly and tried not to let my balance get too low, but eventually it was down to $200. The next time I used the card, the balance rose again to $1,000. From then on, every time I lowered the balance to $200, it was replenished again to $1,000. I decided that there is enough pity in your heart for me to prevent me from starving to death." Tears rolled down Peg's cheeks. It was not only his words, but also the fact that he spoke without emotion. No anger, no sadness, no bitterness, just emptiness. She reached out and hugged her long-lost husband. "I love you, Robert. I can't believe how cruel and selfish the guy I thought was our friend was to both of us. He won't get away with this, I promise. I don't know how long it will take or what I will have to do to convince you that I had nothing to do with this betrayal, but I will never stop trying." Peg then asked the question that had been on her mind since she arrived in OK City. "Robert, I know Pete, or Pedro, dropped you off at the homeless camp, but why did you stay there all this time? You are a smart person with education and business acumen. Why didn't you find a job and move into decent housing? When you say it like that, it all sounds simple. But understand, shortly before I was thrown here, I was in a coma. I had a serious head injury and, at least initially, all my synapses weren't firing. I had terrible headaches, dizziness, and other effects of the concussion. In general, I was not much better off than the drug addicts and mentally ill people in the camp. When I came to my senses, what happened plunged me into deep depression. I was so mentally depressed that my physical abilities suffered. I was so angry and upset at you and Charlie that all my energy was spent feeling sorry for myself. And Mary didn't come along until a few years after me, so there wasn't really anyone holding me back." Peg cried quietly. The pain and suffering that befell her beloved Robert was beyond her strength. She slipped her arms through the remaining wires and tubes and hugged him tenderly. She held him for as long as she could stay in the uncomfortable position she was in, until he finally pushed her away. He still wasn't ready. Lisa and Laura had an emotional reunion at the airport, excited and relieved that their father had been found. Laura was amazed by all the revelations about Uncle Charlie that Lisa laid out while they were driving to the hotel. And when Lisa said that Charlie hoped to seduce her, she laughed until it dawned on her that this was reality, and then she fell silent. "How could he deceive us for so long?" she asked finally. As Dad said, he is a salesman. Entering the hotel to drop off Laura's luggage, they did not notice Pedro, lurking behind a palm planter and watching the door. When they got down to the hall, Charlie was already sitting in his car at the entrance, dressed in a doctor's suit, ready to follow them wherever they went. "This time I won't be fooled," he swore to himself. The sisters parked it outside the maternity hospital and confidently walked inside, believing that the earlier ploy would throw Charlie off the scent. He waited a few minutes after they entered and followed them, holding in his pocket the syringe of fentanyl that Pedro had filled for him. It cost him a lot, but for the benefit he was seeking, it was worth it. Laura's reunion with her father was joyful and emotional. Both were filled with happiness and at the same time, sadness over lost time. Peg and Lisa stepped aside to give them a chance to be together. At this time, Mary returned from the dining room. She had coffee for Peg and forbidden baked goods for Robert. Lisa had already told Laura about Mary, so their acquaintance went smoothly. Mary indicated to Peg that she wanted to take back her knife, and Peg quietly handed it to her. Mary resumed her seat in the chair by the door. They were all chatting amiably when the doctor appeared at the door. At first, no one attached any importance to this. Mary was the first to notice something was wrong. First, she noticed his badge, which didn't look quite right. Then I wondered why he was wearing a mask, since most other medical workers no longer wear masks unless they are near a sick patient. Approaching the bed, he said, "I need to add a special medicine to the IV," and took a syringe out of his pocket. Mary was already on her feet, drawing her knife, when Peg recognized the voice. "Charlie, what are you doing?" she demanded. That's all Mary needed to hear. "You are a bastard," she screamed, swung her right hand in a wide arc, and plunged the knife into Charlie's groin. The sharp knife easily passed through thin clothing and pierced the attacker's flesh. Charlie screamed and reflexively grabbed the wound, stabbing himself with the lethal syringe into his thigh. In the confusion, no one could understand what happened next, and all four women told different stories from different points of view, but Robert, who had been blindfolded the day before, dimly saw Mary's left hand hit the syringe, pressing the plunger. A moment later, fentanyl had entered his heart and brain, and he collapsed to the floor, hitting his head on the steel leg of his hospital bed. The security guard heard Charlie's noise and scream from the hallway and rushed in just as Charlie fell. He grabbed Mary by the arm as she leaned over Charlie, shouting insults in his face and throwing more and more blows. The officer radioed the alarm. When a nurse burst into the room a minute later and saw Charlie on the floor in a pool of blood, she immediately announced a code blue. Doctors and nurses poured into the room from all sides, but it was clear that Charlie had left and would not return. An autopsy later confirmed that fentanyl killed him, but a blow to the head from the fall likely would have also been fatal. The stab wounds were dramatic, but minor, except for the initial wound in the groin. The rest were inflicted after death. The police conducted an investigation and collected statements from everyone who was in the room. Mary's homeless status and possession of an illegal knife nearly swayed the police to charge her with stabbing, but Peg and the sisters' insistence that she was only protecting Robert's life caused them to change their minds. Robert's calm assurance that Mary's quick actions were heroic and saved his life ended the discussion. With the threat eliminated, Robert returned to his room in the main hospital. The events of that day were so traumatic that Peg and the girls took Mary back to the hotel to clean up and rest. "You won't live in this camp anymore," Peg told her. "We'll take you there, collect your things, take everything he might need from Robert's cart, and bring it here. You can tell your friends what happened and tell them that Robert will come back to Ohio with us. I don't know how everything will be there without the mayor," Mary worried. "We'll talk to Robert about who can be trusted to take his place," Peg answered. After thinking a little, she added, "We will give a debit card to whoever becomes the new mayor so as not to leave Robert's friends without a livelihood." Later, while Lisa and Laura were driving Mary back to camp to pick up her and Robert's things, it was finally time for Peg and Robert to talk. Peg had been dreading this moment, but she knew it had to happen if she was to have any future with the man she loved. Sitting at his bedside, she saw that several bandages had been removed from him during the night, including those that hid his face. She knew his vision was blurred, but from where she sat, his eyes were just as blue and piercing as the ones she'd fallen in love with 24 years ago. "Darling, I have to tell you something about what happened during your absence. The first and most important thing is that there was not a single moment when I did not love you and did not want you to come back to me. That being said, I have to explain something." Peg, you don't have to do this. I know that Charlie took my place. This was his plan from the beginning. And then I just don't care. I have adjusted to life here, and Mary will help me return to my role as mayor. I have something to tell you, and I'm going to do it. First of all, Charlie never took your place in my mind and heart. When you got hurt, I was devastated. First because I was afraid of losing you, but also because Charlie had almost succeeded in seducing me. He was close, too close. I was racked with guilt and shame for letting him get into my head. But while in the hospital, you imagined that we were doing this, abandoning you. This was not the case. I had no desire to cheat on you, and I believe Charlie was smart enough to realize that the best thing for him to do was return to being a platonic best friend. I had no idea what she and Pete were doing, and I was puzzled when you disappeared. Charlie put on an Oscar-worthy performance, driving me all over the streets looking for you, even though he knew full well that Pete dumped you here. Posters with your photo were posted all over the city, and there were appeals on radio and local TV channels. The girls cried every night, and I was delirious. When things got so bad that people were afraid I might hurt myself, Charlie started his game. He started staying with me until late at night to keep me company, and after a while, he started staying overnight. Not in our bed, I put him in the spare bedroom. But except for those times when he was at work, he was always with me and the girls. And yes, he played the role of surrogate father, going to their football games and even taking Laura to the school daddy-daughter dance. And in the end, I felt so lonely, and he was so persistent, that I let him into my bed. I didn't know if you were alive or dead, if I would ever see you again. Peg, you don't have to do this, Robert said softly. No, I have to. I am so ashamed and so sorry that I didn't wait for you and that I was so deceived. God, before I got the call that you had been found, he was talking about declaring you dead so we could get married. Now I understand that as soon as we would have received insurance for your death after marriage, he would have faked my untimely death and cashed out the money. I should have the word sucker tattooed on my forehead. It's important to me that you believe that I never loved Charlie. Yes, I trusted him. Yes, I leaned on him. And yes, I had sex with him. Reluctantly at first, but after a while, sexual release became natural. But we didn't make love the way we always made love to you. Charlie was an uncouth and indifferent lout. He didn't care about me. Robert was silent for a minute. I think you understand why I stayed away, he said. Although my perception of the situation may not have been entirely correct, I was right that danger was around the corner and that I was being paid to leave you two alone. I couldn't know how much you were or weren't under Charlie's influence, but from what I saw and from what Pedro told me, it seemed to me that you were together against me. Maybe I should have trusted you more, but for the past 7 years, I have believed not only that I had lost you, but that you were actively plotting against me. Despite all your protests, it is difficult for me to part with this belief. It was Peg's turn to remain silent. If Robert had seen more clearly, he would have seen the confusion on her face. Finally, she brightened up. Well, we have the rest of our lives so I can prove my love to you. As soon as you're discharged, we'll fly home, arrange for your rehabilitation in Columbus, and then we'll see. I already told Mary that she would come with us. Even if you and I are not destined to become husband and wife again, you will have my love, and your friend Mary will also be with you. Did you tell her that she was coming with us? Did it ever occur to you to ask her if she wanted this? You didn't ask me, did you? I mean, Peg, I'm willing to believe that you have good intentions, but you suddenly appear and start dictating how people should live their lives. People who don't always trust you. God, slow down. Step back a little. Let us catch our breath. Damn it. Just yesterday, I was almost killed in a hospital bed, and your lover died trying to do it. Maybe I need a minute to digest all this? And by the way, it was not you who rushed to stop the killer, but Mary. And about Mary, you've seen her on good days, but you can't even imagine what she's like during bad times, and how often these bad days happen. Do not rush. Go to the hotel, hang out with the girls, go shopping or go down to the riverside, have a drink, and let me sort things out. A few days ago, I was in a coma, remember? I hid for 7 years, and I feel like my head is about to explode. Please, give me a break." Peg looked at him in shock. "Oh, Robert, I'm sorry. Look, I know you guys protected me and saved my life. I thank you for this. I'm really glad to see you and glad to see the girls. Everything is just happening too fast now. I need a timeout." "Okay, I understand. I'll leave you alone. A physiotherapist should be coming to work with you now anyway. I love you. See you tomorrow." She waited in the corridor for the girls and Mary. When they left the elevator, she intercepted them. "I think I rushed Robert," she said, "and upset him. Girls, let's go back to the hotel and eat. Mary, would you like to join us?" "No, thank you. I'll be alone with Bobby for a while," she said. "Please talk to him about moving to Ohio with us," Peg asked her. With these words, Peg and her daughters went to dinner and rest. They also needed rest. Over dinner, the girls told Peg about their time with Mary, and Peg shared a little story about her conversation with Robert. Everyone realized that their hopes that the husband and father would happily return home were premature. They also agreed that Mary had become a bigger part of his life than they had realized. During the trip to the hotel, Lisa expressed what they were all thinking. "Mom, I'm not sure Dad will want to come back to Ohio, and I'm sure that he won't go anywhere without Mary." "I think you're right," Peg replied. "He certainly showed no interest in returning to our life together as a husband. But whether he stays with me or not, he needs physical, occupational, and probably mental therapy, which he can get in Ohio and most likely won't get here, given the lifestyle and lack of a support system. I'm worried about these headaches, and I am confident that Mary would benefit from ongoing high-quality treatment for her mental health problems. We can provide this for her in Ohio by driving her to appointments and making sure she takes her medications. We'll have to discuss all this with them in the morning. I'm tired of living out of a suitcase, and I miss home. I really want him to come back, but one way or another, I'm ready to leave. Tomorrow I'm going to force things. Come home and let us help you, or stay here and both fend for yourselves." The three changed at the hotel and then set out to explore the Riverside Entertainment District. They found a cool restaurant and spent some mother-daughter time there. There was a club nearby with drinks and music. They let their hair down, drank wine, and fought off most of the men who tried to pick them up. Several handsome and charming men asked Peg and Lisa to dance. Mama Bear Peg kept the wolves away from Laura, who was watching the bags and occupying the table. By 11 o'clock, they returned to their room, slightly tipsy, happy that they had fun together and remained chaste. The first order of business the next morning was to find Robert's doctor to see if he was ready to go. They were told that although he would need a wheelchair to get around the airport, he was strong enough to get on and off the plane. There will be problems with stairs, so he needs to find a place where he can be on the same floor. Otherwise, if physical and occupational therapy is organized, he will be fine. While it's not for him, an orthopedic surgeon, to recommend, he thinks it would be a good idea to get a mental health evaluation, and he expects some kind of treatment to follow. Armed with this information, the trio headed to Robert's room. They weren't surprised to see Mary curled up next to him on the bed. The narrow hospital mattress was not very comfortable, but, as Mary had already noted, it was better than sleeping on the ground. When they entered, Robert was already awake. He had a very pleased expression on his face and smiled at his wife and daughters. "Good morning," he said. "Couldn't resist going to the hospital for breakfast?" "Good morning," they answered in unison. "No, as tempting as it may sound, we already ate at the hotel," Peg replied, smiling. "We need to discuss the future," she began. "I'm ready to go home. I think the girls are ready too." They nodded in agreement. "I expected that now that the air has cleared of suspicion and fear, you, Robert, would go home with us. You will need physical therapy, and we will make sure you get the best available as well as good aftercare. Of course, at first we didn't know about your relationship with Mary. We don't want her to return to this camp, so it seems most logical for her to come with us." Robert and Mary looked at each other and smiled. It was clear from the expressions on their faces that they were also discussing the future. "Peg, it's very like you to plan for the future," Robert replied. "Both yours and everyone else's. I don't want to say that I judge you, you are an organizer." Mary and I talked and we both agreed that we had no desire to go back to sleeping under a bridge. And although I'm not entirely comfortable being around you yet, Peg, I've come to believe that you mean me no harm. I have to say, I'm surprised that you were susceptible to Charlie's manipulations, but you considered him a loyal friend, and he played that role well until his plan began to fall apart. Then he became more arrogant and desperate and showed his true colors. He reached across the bed and took Mary's hand. "With all that said, I accept your invitation to return with you to Ohio and reconnect with my family." He looked at each of them in turn. "But things can't be the same as they were before." Looking at Peg, he continued, "We've both changed. Both were victims of betrayal. I just found out about it first, and I had more time to come to terms with it." Turning his gaze to Mary, he said, "But I was lucky that there was someone who understood me." He squeezed her hand. "You, Peg, were introduced to the pain of betrayal for the first time. The guy you thought was supporting you actually set you up. Mary and I and our daughters will try to ensure you and help you get through difficult times, because you are the real victim in our little drama. True, I slept under the bridge, but I was lucky, and Mary saved me. Understand? I kept the pain of your betrayal inside me for so long, even if it was not true, I believed in it, that I cannot run to you again. So at least we'll be friends in the beginning. And Mary will be our friend. I don't know if you want us to live in your house or somewhere nearby. I think time will tell how our relationship will develop, the three of us. Some good things happened as a result of all this. I have to thank you, Peg, and you, Lisa, for helping Mary regain her confidence and self-esteem. You treated her like a friend, not a burden, and she made great strides. And so they began the process of moving back to Ohio. Robert and his team were so firmly established on their floor that the nurses, assistants, and doctors who cared for him held a small farewell ceremony. Mary received special praise for her devoted attention to him and, of course, for saving him in difficult times. Robert and Peg thanked everyone for their concern, and Peg announced that her family foundation would make a generous donation to the hospital, which will be used to care for homeless patients who cannot afford the treatment they need. With Robert's discharge, papers came instructions on how to move safely with his mostly healed injuries. There were prescriptions to be filled and reports for the doctors and physiotherapists he should see upon arrival. Peg and the girls took him and Mary back to the homeless camp to say goodbye and pick up everything they had left there. Robert gathered his friends around him and made a short speech, thanking them for their friendship and appointing Speedy as the new mayor. Unbeknownst to the others, he handed Speedy the precious debit card and whispered the PIN. "I'll make sure there's always money there," he promised. The flight passed without incident. To help Robert cope with the pain of sitting for long periods of time with sore legs and arms, doctors gave him strong painkillers, so he slept most of the way. There was some awkwardness when boarding the plane. Both Peg and Mary decided they would sit next to him. Not wanting to cause a scene, Peg acquiesced to Mary, a gesture that would take on added significance when they arrived home, and the question of sleeping arrangements had to be decided. Robert gently but firmly informed Peg that he had no intention of returning to the marital bed, at least not anytime soon, and that he and Mary would be sharing a room. Seeing that this message was causing Peg pain, Mary suggested that she should have her own room, since in a big house this would not be a problem. "I think it's best if we all have our own space until things become clearer," she said. Peg was relieved, but at the same time she realized that she would have to come to terms with the fact that she would no longer dominate the house, as she had been for the past 7 years. Robert saw a headache specialist, who determined that the impact had displaced a metal plate in his skull. Surgery corrected the problem to the point that his judgment and problem-solving ability were restored, but he will likely continue to experience lower intensity headaches for the rest of his life as a result of his injuries. Pedro, realizing that the income promised to him would not come, left for the south. For several weeks, he visited brothels in Mexican border cities until he found Maria in Mexicali, the capital of the state of Baja California in Mexico. It took him a while to come up with a plan to get her away from her bandit masters, but he eventually succeeded and they fled across the border. They eventually settled down and settled in Deerfield, Michigan. After she was treated for several sexually transmitted diseases, they resumed sexual activity and eventually got married. They opened a taco stand and became pillars of the small community. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Mexico. It took him a while to come up with a plan to get her away from her bandit masters, but he eventually succeeded and they fled across the border. They eventually settled down and settled in Deerfield, Michigan. After she was treated for several sexually transmitted diseases, they resumed sexual activity and eventually got married. They opened a taco stand and became pillars of the small community. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.